Christoph is going to lead us off in this section. This is Christoph Bentom, and he is a member of the InnerSource Commons community. So we see him around the playground. He originally started thinking about this a while ago, wrote a talk for us for the Galway Summit, which was in the springtime. And then when it came time for him to deliver it, he had lost his voice, and there was no voice. So we gave him a pass, and he was kind enough to record the talk for us later when he got his voice back, and we were blown away. So we've been encouraging him to continue this conversation. And during the Community Management Group Summit that happened on Sunday here, about 75 people that wandered through here on Sunday, and one of the amazing talks that we heard was Christoph. And so he blew some minds of some long-standing open source theorists and activists. And I think the talk today is going to be a little more practical, a little bit less mind-blowing, but he has it in him. So if you find this interesting, see if you can get it in questions to take the lid on. All right, Christoph.
Thank you for the amazing introduction.
I did pick each and every session.
So yeah, the talk on Sunday was about, where to start? I've been thinking about a lot of this stuff for a very long time. So I'm a business owner, I'm a member of the open source community, and I can't help it, I'm a philosopher. It's just, it's stronger than me. I'm always looking for philosophy in whatever I'm touched. And so this talk was kind of like let's take all my reading lists and try to condense it into like something really practical that the InnerSourcing community could use. Like what are the things that have surprised me over the years doing open source that were applicable in building companies and building communities. So I did this talk, and it was amazing because it gave me an opportunity to like start condensing the information. So then I did a second iteration at condensing, and that was a Sunday talk. And I'm still in flow from. It was awesome. Anyway, so I'm Christoph Bentom. I'm co-founder of Pronovix. We're a consultancy specialized in developer portals. Mostly that's API developer portals, so outward-facing, like doing digital transformation, that kind of stuff. But there's also some developer portals in InnerSourcing community, like for doing developer experience. But that's why I'm interested in this community, to learn more about how can we cross that bridge. And this talk is about, so we hear often a lot of talks about the best practices and the tools and the really more structural things. But in the definition of InnerSource, there's also this part about open source-like culture. And then I go like, open source-like culture, that's hard. Like, how do you even start with that? And this talk is an attempt at giving you some pointers to potential things that you could use to start building open source-like culture. Already did this part. Yeah. Quick thank you. I always do it. I'll go really quick. Thank you to the community. You make my life more awesome and teach me new stuff that I didn't know that I knew. My colleagues for helping me get here, and my family. So, why do we need InnerSource? Lots of biology pictures, you'll see. Some creepy ones with insects. I hope nobody has an ant phobia. There's no spiders. So, when I started looking for information, like when I prepared this talk, I found this article in Forbes, which was about the Copernican revolution in management. And the core idea of that was that we're becoming more human-centered, more human-centric in industry, and and that's a great thing, right? And I was like, based on what I had been reading before, I was like, yes, but are we becoming human-centric because we care more about people, or probably not, right? So why are we becoming more human-centric? And I think the answer to that question is this. What's the difference between complicated and complex? Some of you might know this is something that goes around in the community a little bit. The key difference between complicated and complex is that complicated systems are like machines. They're incredibly efficient, they're really good at doing that one thing that they're designed for, and they can do it better than anything else. But if you give slightly different inputs, the whole thing just blows up. Complex systems are like biological systems where you have multiple different parts and they're interacting with each other, and they're very robust and resilient. They're not as efficient as complicated systems, but they're really good at getting the job done, even if things completely change and everything is different tomorrow. I believe that this is the transformation that's going on right now, from complicated to complex, and I'll explain you why in a moment. Complicated systems, for example, factories, most of our businesses, very procedure-oriented organizations, government with bureaucracies. Complex systems are like communities, like the open source community, or some organizations that have modeled themselves after this. So what's the problem? I think the key problem is that to be able to build complicated systems, you're making a really, really big assumption in that the inputs of the system is going to stay the same. And in mathematics, we do this thing where we do approximations to nonlinear functions with linear functions. If we're lucky, we can do this. And I think that what's going on is that we're getting unlucky. And, and the whole thing, the lid is blown off. and we're now in a nonlinear world, a much more complex world. And the reason for that, I believe, the reason for that, I believe, is that with the growth of information technology and interaction and interconnection, we've built this exponentially more complex world than we used to have. We used to live in a world where you had your neighbors and you had your coworkers, and that was about it. Today you're connected to millions, if not billions, of people, and some of us are on a daily basis somewhat interacting with millions of people, through Twitter, through social networks, and so on. Now, the result of that, if you're looking at network theory, if you're getting network effects, the more nodes you add to a network, the more complex it becomes. Basically, what we've created is this massively complex world where any little action from one of the nodes in your network can completely change everything. So we're now living in a world that no longer works for linear systems, and we still have to catch up. And I think this is the reason why so many companies are struggling. Now, how do you start addressing this problem? What is different in complex systems? This talk is about 7 models of things where things kind of fail, or things are weird or different or unexpected, and lessons that we can learn from that. There's a massive reading list. It's much better than Sunday, where I didn't have any reading list. There's lots of slides with pictures of book covers. You can read for a year or 2 or 3 with what I'll share you today. So first one is complexity. I already kind of explained this a little bit in the introduction. But this core question is, why are established companies struggling? Because they have so much resources, they have so much power. By all means, they shouldn't be struggling, and still they are. And I think the key is that the game has changed, and we're now living in a world where we need to organize for complexity. This one book by Niels Fleging is an interesting one. It's very specific. But the one that for me was the biggest eye-opener was Reinventing Organizations. It's a book about different cultures and different cultures you can have in organizations, and how you can recognize them and what you can do with them. And then, so it's kind of like the why, and then Brave New Work is the how. It's like, how do you go about changing an organization and becoming more self-organizing? But the 2 seconds shortcut from what I grasped from this as like the key thing to learn from it is that traditional hierarchical organizations, they don't have enough contact surface with customers. And it takes them a lot longer to, for information to filter up. And because of that, they're not as adaptive as self-organizing teams that have a much bigger contact surface with the world around them. So it's kind of like traditional organizations are like oil tankers. They have a hard time to change course. New organizations are like swarms, and they're constantly adapting and changing what they're doing. Okay. So the core lesson I already mentioned is to thrive in a fast-changing world, you need to be adaptive. You need to become complex. Okay, so that was the warm-up. 6 more to go. Motivation. This is kind of mainstream. I'm sure a lot of you have seen like books about this or articles about it. But the core question I ask here is, why do all these people voluntarily contribute to open source? It's not logical, doesn't make sense from our original way of looking at the world. If you're thinking about the world as I'm going to do something for you, I'm going to get something back, it doesn't always hold up. So the key there is that motivation is different than what we thought it was. Drive is from Pink, like he's rehashing research that has been done by other people, and he makes it a little bit more rockable. We already had it in the talk earlier today. Mastery, autonomy, and purpose. So that was kind of interesting. Now, the one that really shook my world was the other one, which was punished by rewards. That rewarding people can actually be bad, right? That when you build reward structures and incentive structures, you can actually be destroying what you're doing. That was like, okay. So the key there is that, there's this extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. And even rewards are extrinsic. So they kind of go counter to the intrinsic motivation that people normally have in themselves. There's also belonging, and Katrina from Red Hat, she pointed this out to me, and that was interesting because it didn't fit in my model, so I had to change my model a bit. Think about this. If you're building an incentive structure, you're probably destroying intrinsic motivation, and especially here in the US, that's quite controversial. Key lesson is motivation is not about sticks, but it's also not about carrots. Next is cooperation. By the way, this lovely picture is a symbiont of an acacia. It's an ant species that lives in an acacia. It's beautiful, really interesting, fascinating. Key question is, how do open source communities cooperate without budgets or bosses? Because some of the the largest communities have no budgets. They have leaders, but they don't have bosses. For me, this book was a massive eye-opener. It's written by David Graeber. Other people call him the anarchistic anthropologist. He says that you shouldn't call him that. It's fascinating. He talks about how if you go look at tribes, pre-money tribes that haven't seen money yet, they don't do equivalent exchange. They don't do tit-for-tat trading. They just give to each other because we're people. We help each other, and that is only after you introduce money that you get the shift to what are we going to do if you wouldn't have money? And that's completely changes all of this, and so it has a lot of impact on the way I look at the world and I think about the world. I don't mean that we should just get rid of money. Money is very valuable technology, but it's interesting to think about it that not everything needs to be about transactional relationships. So the key here I think, is that what money did was that it was a technology for us that allowed us to scale our society beyond the reach of our villages and our small communities that we could keep in our heads. And now we built this tool, this technology that allowed us to forget our relationships so that we could have much more relationships with each other. Because I give you something, you give me something back, we're good. You work for me, I can fire you without caring about you. There's some stuff here that I feel like actually we're losing some of our humanity there. And I think the key thing that I learned from that is that collaboration at scale, or what we can learn from open source, is that collaboration at scale does not have to be transactional. That's big. Imagine a world where there's also non-transactional collaboration in this massive scale. Communication. Why do we see all this polarization happening in our communities? I'm not going to talk about politics. I'm Belgian. I'm trying to keep out of it. Although in Belgium it's just as, well, not as, well, no, it's bad. But for me, a transformational book was The Anatomy of Peace, because it taught me about demon dialogues. And I don't know if I'm sure everybody knows this. Do you know people that you really love, but you start having these conversations where you say something and then the other person misinterprets it, says something that actually really triggers you, so you say something even worse, and then they say something even worse, and you have a little... This book explains what you're doing. They call it a demon dialogue. Understanding this concept for me was transformational for my relationship, for my life, basically. So very interesting book. But it's the what and the how. It's the what. The how to address that problem is nonviolent communication. If you haven't heard of it, it's a fantastic methodology for escaping that trap. So go and have a look at it. The 5 seconds summary of it is what most people do when they're in a conflict position, like in a conflict, or they're talking with people, is they'll say something like, "Oh, I think we should do this," and the other person says like, "No, I think we should do this," and then you start arguing about why your strategy is better than the other strategy, without really listening to each other. The other thing, like once you're a little bit deeper and you know a person a little bit more, you start doing things like, "Oh, you're always such a blah blah blah," and you're objectifying people. You're collapsing them into this one trait that's bad, and saying that they're always like this. And so both of these are really bad things. So learning not to do them is one of the biggest life skills you can gain. That applies both in your personal life, but also in your business. Because if you can learn to do nonviolent communication in your teams, you're going to be a lot more effective. If you can teach it to people, also be more effective. The way you do it is you say, when you do this, or when I see this, I feel ... and I think, or what I sense is that you need this, and this is what I need. Can we figure a way out how we can combine our needs to create a joint strategy without just jumping straight into the strategy? Brilliant. It even works on Twitter. I've done this on Twitter. It's insane. So, key lesson is, when we focus around our feelings and our needs, instead of the image that we have of people and the strategy that we think we should be doing, conflicts can actually be opportunities for growth. I'm a conflict avoider. This is like kind of, I don't like conflict. I learned to embrace conflict after learning about this stuff. What a depressing picture, right? Next is language. This is, well, I was trying to find like a good snatchy question that kind of captures the idea. But how do you recognize great communities? And that can be great companies, great families, great teams, whatever. This book talks about language patterns that you can recognize in people and in teams that tell you how mature they are, and how, tell you something about how easy it is to work there, or what the result will be. And very short. It's the things in the green. You have some people that are like, the world sucks, it's all going to hell, this is awful, burn it all. Those are not really good people to work with. And probably you can't really work with them until they've stepped one level up. Second one is, my life sucks, but yours doesn't. A lot of us are, or a lot of people are in this world, especially in our companies today. If you have a bad boss, this is where you probably are spending most of your life. The next one up is, I am great. Now, the problem is that the I am great boss creates the my life sucks subordinate. Because they're like, I'm so great, and you're crap. They're not really great places to work. The fourth one is, we are great. And here it starts getting magical, because now people can help and support each other and do a lot more interesting things. A lot more innovation can happen also, because the best ideas don't have to come from the boss. But there's like, you should read the book. It talks about how they thought that was like the top level, and then they found this other group of people that are like, the world is awesome, and that are just like, it's just all awesome. Like, there's no competition. We're just doing cool stuff here, and he talks about how teams can resonate between different layers of this. So I'm like, if you're, well, all of us, go look around you, look at how people talk, think about how you feel in those teams that you're working in, and then maybe you can do something by trying to change your language. So language is an indicator of cultural maturity. And the best one, in the best cultures, competition disappears. Very interesting. Value, and I need to hurry a little bit. This is, it's kind of a weird question. I had to figure something out. But why can't we find bottlenecks in software projects, or not that easily? It comes from this book, A Project to Product. There's a lot of stuff happening in the API space where we're looking for ways to move beyond project thinking and into product thinking, because product thinking is much more productive, because project thinking gives us abandoned projects and all kinds of bad stuff. And I think the key thing I got from this, or that fits kind of in the rest of the model, is that software are value networks rather than value streams. Especially if you're starting to do APIs and you start to, especially if you're trying to do microservices. But normally, if you start looking at your organization, you'll see that software is changing from the streamlined flow of production towards a more network approach. And in a network, you can reroute, just like the internet reroutes around bottlenecks. You can reroute around bottlenecks in your production. So digital businesses are value networks rather than value streams. Okay, I'll share my slides. So next is constraints. Who here is constraints kind of a weird term? For me, I didn't get this for a very long time. That's a cup, right? We immediately recognize it. But why? Because I don't know, what is this, lead or something? I don't know. But still, we can recognize it's a cup. What is the thing that makes it a cup? It's not the material, it's the constraints, and it's the open space that it creates. It's a whole lot of stuff to unpack. Yeah, my talk on Sunday was about this. I think the question that I want to ask you about this is, how do self-organizing systems, like living systems, or self-organizing teams, how do they protect against themselves against failure? And how do they actually operate? And this specs a lot. Like this is at least an hour talk just on its own. But I think the most, well, there's a lot of life-changing books here, but that first one, I found this after I tried to read a book from Terence Deacon, the professor who works together with Jeremy Sherman. And I didn't understand it. I spent like a whole summer trying to understand it. It was just really, really complicated, lots of jargon, didn't get it. But then I found this book, and I was like, oh, now I get it. And basically it talks about how you can go from constraints, like how living systems work through constraints. Not by making deterministic chains of value creation, but by setting like, okay, we're going to have a constraint here, and you're not going to go that way, but just a little bit here. And it's like a whole different way of thinking. I think microservice thinking should be about this. Again, another talk. Checklist Manifesto is a practical guide for how to start doing something similar, I think, maybe. And Anti-Fragile is also a really awesome book about how to build systems that are anti-fragile, that don't fail by having multiple units that can fail instead of the whole system. And this is like biological systems are built this way. They have constraints and they have this anti-fragility built in. And I think the software industry is starting to start applying those principles, and it's really, really interesting because it's just a whole different way of doing things. So living systems use just enough constraints and fallible substructures to gain immortality because they keep, self-producing and continue the chain of life. Conclusion. Yeah. There's another way to grow systems, and mark that word, grow, not build or design. I had to think a bit about this. But there's another way of growing systems that use constraints and affordances. I didn't explain that affordances, but it's connected to constraints. It's a way where you create space for people to do their thing. So instead of telling them, here's your job, do this one thing, you say, here's some space for you, and here's some tools, and just do valuable stuff. And it's magic what happens when you do that, because now you've built a complex organization that can adapt to whatever complexity you throw at it. So if you need to change from a complicated world to a complex world, you need to put people in the center, because you have to let them be complex again, because we're by nature complex. We're already doing this. This is how we're built. And the beauty is that to create a complex organization that is adaptive, you have to be human-centric. And thinking in this way and building organizations this way, and I think this is what we're doing in InnerSource world, is going to be better for business, it's going to be better for communities, it's going to be better for people that are working in your organization. You're going to build better software and healthier relationships. And that's all, folks.
So, did I lie? I took pictures of all the book covers and I'm tweeting them. That is within InnerSourcing tag, so you guys can find them. And does anybody have a question for Christoph? We did this before people were stunned. Yeah.
Thank you. So the question is about what happens when you start paying open source contributors. I think it's bad. And I feel bad saying that it's bad, because I also need to earn a living, and everybody needs to. I think that we need to do something, the way Airbnb does things, where you separate getting paid from the interaction. I think it's something similar that we need to be able to do, where by the time you're having the experience and you're actually working and doing your thing, you've already forgotten that you've paid. And I think it's something like that we need to do separation. I've also been thinking about something like that can live in parallel with currencies, where we could create a value graph. There's a whole theory here. It's too much to unpack, but I think a lot of the things that are wrong today are about things becoming transactional. And like right now, even our communication is becoming transactional, because there's organizations that are making money on our communication. And it's destroying us. It's destroying our cultural, it's distorting everything. So And I'm not saying that we should abolish money. I think money is great because it creates freedom, and it does a lot of really good stuff. But I think that we need to create something to counterbalance money, so that we can have a healthy relationship with this. Yeah, Russ?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks.
One of the transactions I've been thinking about that relates to this quite a bit, I think, is the paycheck.
Yeah.
You know, a transaction from the company to employee. Have you thought about, given the pervasive nature of that transaction, in a place where we want the complex relationship to thrive to InnerSource? Are there strategies
Yes.
or approaches for how to reconcile so that the transaction, which will continue to happen, doesn't overwhelm and keep us in that complicated set of companies?
So I think the self-organizing organizations movement, they have answers for this. Basically, the core idea is that you need to make paycheck non-conditional. We do this in our organization. You're going to get paid. You're part of our family. You're part of our tribe. We don't measure. We have some evaluation and so on, peer review, but you're going to get paid no matter what. You have a bad month, so be it. And by making it non-conditional, you take that away, and you change that. But there's a whole lot of strategies for this, and Brave New Work has a section about that. Thanks.
Anybody else? Yes?
Thanks. Actually, I haven't. So I'm Belgian. Yeah.
You would like it.
I know, I would love it, but I haven't gotten there yet. No.
It's very dusty.
Yeah.
Very, very
So,
dusty.
yeah, thanks. So I'd love to go, but I think I should go with my family, and that makes it
Yeah,
harder.
that's probably safer.
Yeah.
Okay, Benjamin, do you want to get started?
Yeah.
Setting yourself up, and we'll do however many more questions.
Yeah. So I think the key is probably about boundaries and about learning to sense at your boundary. But it's hard. I think if you read Brave New Work, they have this concept of either you believe that people are bad and you're going to have bad people, or you believe that people are good and you're going to have good people. Because the fact that you're behaving a certain way completely shifts the culture. Like if you set systems in place to punish people that are behaving bad, you're triggering bad behavior. And but Brave New Work is a good place to start. I don't know how you do this at such a large scale. That's harder. And yeah, the talk on Sunday was it was like the bottom philosophy under all of that. And I'm still processing, so I haven't gotten to the end yet. I'm not sure you cannot never actually even ever, but yeah. But I'm happy to talk more about it.
Yeah,
Probably.
I can say that when open source started, and it was based on a gift economy and not driven by people's paychecks so much, there weren't very many people who got paid to do it. It was a slightly different animal than it is now. As we moved in the direction of people getting paid to do open source, it's changed the movement in some good and some bad ways.
Yeah.
And the original idea of the gift economy was really compelling, but it was also really hard to explain to people. So you shouldn't feel bad if it feels like it's going over your head.